Angus Young might be a short guy, but when it comes to not liking other musicians, the AC/DC rock star hits really hard. Everyone knows him for his amazing guitar playing and his schoolboy outfit. Angus was never scared to say bad things about musicians he didn't like. Whether it was because of big egos, bad attitudes, or just fights in rock music, his dislikes were as hot as his guitar playing. Here are the top 6 musicians Angus Young hated the most. In rock music history, very few band names are as respected as Led Zeppelin. People say they were the first to play hard rock and heavy metal music. Their new way of writing songs, loud guitar playing and huge concerts made them almost like legends. But even famous bands can get criticized by other musicians. And for Angus Young, the famous guitar player from AC/DC, Zeppelin was a band that made him feel both amazed and honestly critical, especially when it came to their live shows. Angus has always talked honestly about musicians and their performances. He thinks energy, being real, and connecting with the audience are the most important things. While he never said Led Zeppelin was a band he hated, he did look at them carefully, especially pointing out what he thought was wrong with how they did live concerts. Thinking back to a show he went to, Young remembered, "I've seen that band live, and they were on for 3 hours. For 2 hours they made the audience bored." Then at the end, the sentence he didn't finish says it all. While Zeppelin could have amazing moments, most of their show, in Angus's opinion, had too much showing off and uneven timing. To a guitar player who believes in constantly keeping the audience interested and making a direct impact, the idea of a band taking over the stage for hours without always keeping the crowd's attention was annoying. For Young, rock performances were supposed to be immediate, intense experiences that grabbed the audience's energy from the first guitar chord and kept it going the whole time. Long parts with extended solos, making things up on the spot, or fancy showmanship, like he saw with Zeppelin, could make the very people the music was meant to excite lose interest. Angus's criticism also shows us his bigger musical beliefs. Unlike bands that became famous for complicated production or long improvised jams, AC/DC's way has always been simple, high energy, and totally direct. Every note, guitar riff, and vocal line is designed to hit hard and fast, to grab attention without any distractions. From this point of view, even the greatest rock bands could mess up if they failed to keep that intensity and focus. When watching Zeppelin's really long set, Young noticed a disconnect between technical skill and keeping the audience interested. He saw this disconnect as boredom rather than amazement. This observation doesn't take away from Zeppelin's legendary status. Their albums are still timeless, and their influence on rock, metal, and countless musicians can't be denied. However, Angus' comments remind us that being technically amazing alone doesn't promise a great live performance. A band can be musically brilliant, but still fail to keep the emotional and intense connection that separates a memorable concert from a boring one. In Young's opinion, Zeppelin sometimes fell into this trap, pleasing themselves at the cost of their audience's continued excitement. Also, his criticism matches his general beliefs about rock authenticity. Angus values energy, simplicity, and audience connection over complexity, just for the sake of being complex. Zeppelin's love for extended solos, improvised tangents, and theatrical interludes, while celebrated by many, clashed with Young's belief that rock should stay relentlessly engaging and immediate. His observations suggest that even the titans of the genre were not safe from criticism if their performances went away from this belief. During the 1970s and 1980s, AC/DC and Kiss were two of the time period's most important rock bands. Both ruled stages worldwide, celebrated for their high-energy performances, catchy songs, and devoted fan bases. Yet while they both had commercial success and cultural importance, their approaches to rock and roll could not have been more different. Where Kiss leaned into theatricality, fancy shows, and spectacle, AC/DC, led by Angus Young, stayed committed to a philosophy that put raw energy, musicianship, and attitude over gimmicks. From the beginning, Young was doubtful of bands that relied heavily on visual spectacle to engage audiences. Kiss, with their famous makeup, fire-breathing stunts, blood-spitting tricks, and elaborate fireworks represented the kind of theatricality Young found unconvincing. While he respected that their approach thrilled millions, he openly saw it as a mask for what he thought was musical shallowness. To Young, rock music should captivate through sheer force and skill, not through costume changes or stage tricks. The spectacle in his eyes was a distraction rather than an improvement. Young's dislike for Kiss was not based on rivalry or jealousy, but on principle. He believed that a band's power came from the music itself, the riffs, the rhythm, and the connection between performer and audience. AC/DC's shows, while electrifying, were simple in comparison. Blistering guitar solos, thunderous drum beats, and a visceral no-nonsense energy. Every note had purpose. Every song was played with precision and intensity. Kiss, by contrast, represented what Young saw as an overly complicated approach, emphasizing theatricality at the expense of raw musical impact. He often made fun of their reliance on flashiness as a crutch, a way to make up for what he thought was a lack of genuine musical depth. The philosophical divide between the bands was made clear during a potential opportunity for a joint tour. Gene Simmons, co-founder and bassist of Kiss, later revealed that AC/DC had been invited to tour with them, but said no. According to Simmons, AC/DC turned down the offer because Kiss's fancy presentation was too far removed from the stripped-down, hard-hitting rock that AC/DC stood for. This decision showed Young's unwavering commitment to his vision of rock music, a world where energy, authenticity, and technical skill mattered far more than costumes, theatrics, or spectacle. Young's critique also highlights a bigger tension within the rock world, the balance between image and substance. Kiss's success was undeniable. They sold out arenas, inspired tons of fans, and became cultural icons. Yet, Young saw them as representing a brand of rock that leaned heavily on style over substance, putting appearance and theatrics above musical integrity. While the makeup and stunts entertained, they could not, in Young's view, substitute for precision guitar work, tight rhythm sections, or songs built to last. AC/DC's power came not from fireworks or persona, but from a relentless commitment to craft, performance, and pure rock energy. Despite Kiss's commercial achievements, Young never saw them as musical equals. To him, they were a warning example of a band that put image over artistry, achieving fame through spectacle rather than through the lasting qualities that define great rock music. The contrast between AC/DC and Kiss reflects not just a personal preference, but a philosophical stance that rock and roll should ignite through energy, passion, and musical skill first and foremost, and that no amount of makeup, fire, or theatrics could replace those essentials. In the world of hard rock, few figures command the intensity and authenticity of Angus Young, the relentless lead guitarist of AC/DC. Known for his electrifying performances, schoolboy outfit, and uncompromising approach to rock and roll, Young has never been shy about expressing his opinions, especially when it comes to artists he feels fall short of true originality. One target of his sharp tongue has been the British rock pioneers Deep Purple, a band often celebrated for their technical skill and role in shaping heavy metal and hard rock. Angus's critique is refreshingly direct, revealing both his personal standards for rock and his broader attitude toward bands he considers copycats. In interviews reported by Far Out magazine and Guitar World, Young remembered going to a Deep Purple concert early in his career. The memory stayed clear, but not for good reasons. "I saw Deep Purple live once, and I paid money for it. I thought, gosh, this is ridiculous," he said, capturing a sense of disappointment that went beyond just not being satisfied. To Young, the experience was not just boring. It was a perfect example of a larger problem he saw in the band's approach to music. His criticism was based on a dislike for what he considered fake showmanship. Angus described seeing performances where technical skill was highlighted, but the soul of the music, the raw energy, the driving rock and roll spirit felt watered down by theatrics and too much pretense. For Young, rock was about power, energy, and emotional connection with the audience, not a polished display of skill that hid a lack of genuine feeling. "You just see through all that sort of stuff," he explained. reflecting the way his sharp eye could see past the flash and spectacle to what he thought was the essence of rock. Young's critique did not stop at performance style. He also attacked the band's artistic originality. In one of his most blunt assessments, he called Deep Purple a poor man's Led Zeppelin. This was more than a casual insult. It was a statement about influence, innovation, and perceived imitation. By comparing them unfavorably to Led Zeppelin, Young suggested that Deep Purple was operating in the shadow of a greater, more groundbreaking band. He implied that they borrowed ideas, riffs, and stylistic cues without matching the creative impact or cultural importance of their peers. To Young, Deep Purple's music may have been technically competent, but it lacked the authentic spark that could make a lasting impression in the competitive hard rock landscape of the 1970s. This assessment fits into a broader pattern of Young's musical philosophy. As a guitarist and performer, he has consistently championed raw, intense rock over elaborate theatrics or self-conscious artistry. His own performances with AC/DC are famously straightforward. Blistering riffs, high-energy solos, and a focus on connecting directly with fans. In that context, Deep Purple's layered, progressive, and sometimes fancy approach to rock may have struck him as overly complicated and self-indulgent, a style that gave up intensity for technical showmanship. Young's comments, while harsh, also reveal a deep respect for authenticity in rock music. His dislike for Deep Purple was not born of petty jealousy or rivalry. Rather, it reflects a commitment to a particular vision of rock, a vision defined by immediacy, power, and unfiltered energy. Bands that fail to capture that essence in his eyes are exposed as pretenders regardless of critical praise or commercial success. By calling Deep Purple a poor man's Zeppelin, Young distilled years of observation into a sharply cutting verdict that left little room for nuance, but communicated everything about his uncompromising standards. The 1980s were dominated by a huge shift in the rock landscape. As heavy metal and hard rock expanded into mainstream culture, a new breed of bands emerged, defined by flashy visuals, polished production, and radio-friendly hooks. Among these, Bon Jovi, along with Mötley Crüe, Poison, and Def Leppard, rose to huge popularity. Their music, filled with anthemic choruses, soaring vocals, and power ballads, was designed to appeal to the widest possible audience, combining hard rock energy with commercial accessibility. Yet while the world embraced these bands, AC/DC and particularly Angus Young remained critical of the movement's artistic beliefs. Though there is no direct quote from Young targeting Bon Jovi specifically, the philosophy behind AC/DC's approach to rock music made their stance clear. For Angus and his band, rock was gritty, intense, and uncompromising. Every song, every riff, every performance was meant to convey raw power and unfiltered emotion, stripped of excess decoration or glossy production. AC/DC's beliefs were rooted in simplicity, a strong rhythm section driving guitar riffs and vocals that could cut through the noise of any stadium without the help of synthesizers or elaborate studio effects. Glam and hair metal, in contrast, represented a very different approach. Bands like Bon Jovi embraced image-driven looks from big hair and makeup to coordinated stage outfits and dramatic lighting. Their shows often emphasized spectacle choreographed movements and theatricality. Musically, they used synthesizers, layered harmonies, and polished production techniques designed to dominate radio airplay. Power ballads became signature tracks, balancing emotional appeal with mainstream sensibility. While effective for chart success, these elements represented in Young's eyes a departure from the core principles of hard rock. To Angus, this emphasis on gloss and commercialism was at odds with what he considered authentic rock and roll. The raw, electrifying energy of AC/DC's music was about immediacy, precision, and connection, qualities that could not be manufactured through image, stagecraft, or studio wizardry. Bands like Bon Jovi, by leaning heavily into polished soundscapes and crossover appeal, risked diluting the primal force that Young believed defined true rock. In other words, he saw glam metal not as a revolutionary reinvention of the genre, but as a commercialized, watered-down version of hard rock, tailored to fit the tastes of mainstream radio rather than the heart of the audience. The contrast between the two philosophies is striking. AC/DC's shows were intentionally straightforward: thunderous riffs, pounding drums, and Angus Young's electrifying guitar work delivered without distraction, without glam. Metal performances, by contrast, often relied on spectacle, choreography, and emotional theatrics, creating a separation between musician and audience that Young found alienating. Where AC/DC sought to immerse listeners in the raw physicality of the music, glam bands invited them to consume a package of performance and persona, rather than an unfiltered sonic experience. Young's critique, though rarely delivered as a public rant against specific bands, reflects a larger skepticism toward the 1980s hair metal movement. To him, bands like Bon Jovi succeeded commercially, but they did so by putting accessibility and image over the grit, authenticity, and technical skill that formed the backbone of AC/DC's philosophy. Glam metal, in his view, represented an era of rock that had traded substance for spectacle, polish for power, and commercial appeal for artistic integrity. By the late 1970s, the Rolling Stones had long been regarded as one of the most influential rock bands in history. Their impact on the genre was undeniable. From blues-inspired riffs to chart-topping hits, they had helped define what modern rock and roll could be. Yet, despite the Stones' legendary status, Angus Young, the lead guitarist of AC/DC, was openly critical of their musical direction during this period. In a 1977 interview with Classic Rock magazine, Young did not hold back, highlighting what he saw as a big departure from the raw, unfiltered rock and roll that had originally made the Stones famous. Young's critique was centered on what he saw as the band's growing fascination with soul music. He stated bluntly, "The Rolling Stones get up and play soul music these days. This is supposed to be rock and roll." The remark captures both surprise and disapproval. For Young, rock music was about grit, raw energy, and unpolished authenticity, qualities that could easily be overshadowed by the smoother, more melodic stylings of soul. While soul was a vital and culturally important genre, Young believed that its incorporation by a rock band like the Stones represented a shift away from the very essence of what he considered rock's core identity. He went further, remarking, "Leave that to the people who do it best, the black people." This statement, while controversial in its phrasing, reflects Young's recognition of soul music's roots and his respect for the genre's pioneers. He was not dismissing soul's value. Rather, he was arguing that the Stones' attempts at the style, though well-intentioned, could not match the authenticity and depth brought by its original performers. In Young's view, certain musical expressions carried cultural and technical details that could not simply be moved into a rock context without losing something essential. Underlying Young's comments was a deeper philosophy about artistic integrity and specialization. He believed that every band and every musician should excel within the area that best matched their skills and identity. The Stones, whose brilliance had been created in blues-infused rock, were at their most compelling when they leaned into gritty guitar riffs, pounding rhythms, and high-energy rock performances. When they ventured into soul, Young argued, they risked watering down the very elements that had made them extraordinary, creating music that, while polished, lacked the raw, intense punch that fans expected. Young's perspective also sheds light on his own approach to rock and roll. With AC/DC, the philosophy was clear. Music should hit hard, deliver consistent energy, and remain unadorned by styles or trends that could compromise its immediacy. Where the Stones experimented with genre and stylization, AC/DC doubled down on simplicity and intensity. Every riff, drum beat, and vocal line was designed to maintain the pure, uncompromising spirit of rock, ensuring that the music resonated on a physical as well as emotional level. Importantly, Young's critique was not born of jealousy or rivalry. It was rooted in a purist's approach to rock and roll, a belief that bands should honor their strengths rather than chasing trends or experimenting with styles outside their core competency. He acknowledged the importance of soul as a genre and the influence it had on rock, but he firmly believed that the Stones' power lay in their blues-based gritty foundations. By attempting to branch into soul, they risked losing the rawness and authenticity that had earned them legendary status in the first place. The rise of punk rock in the mid to late 1970s marked a dramatic shift in popular music. Bands like the Ramones championed a stripped-down high-energy sound that cut away the excesses of stadium rock and progressive experimentation. Their songs were short, fast, and relentlessly raw, celebrating attitude over technical mastery. While the punk movement got widespread praise for revitalizing rock and inspiring generations of musicians, not everyone was convinced of its revolutionary status. Among the doubters was Angus Young, the iconic lead guitarist of AC/DC, a band known for its tight, high-voltage riffs and uncompromising commitment to musicianship. Young's critique of punk, and of the Ramones in particular, was rooted in his firm belief that rock music required more than energy or rebellious flair. It demanded skill, precision, and authentic musicality. While punk was praised by fans and critics for its raw immediacy, Young saw it as a reduction of rock to its most basic, unrefined elements. To him, the movement was not genuinely innovative. Rather, it repackaged ideas that earlier bands had already explored. He pointed specifically to groups like the Small Faces and the Faces, who decades earlier had injected rock with a rough-edged attitude, swagger, and authenticity long before punk emerged. In Young's eyes, punk bands were simply borrowing from this earlier blueprint, stripping away complexity and presenting rawness as their primary identity. This perspective shaped Young's view of the Ramones. Despite their influence and reputation, he remained unimpressed by their minimalist approach. He famously remembered hearing their music and thinking, "I heard one song and it did nothing for me. It felt like my first band when I was 12, which was better." The remark shows his assessment that the Ramones' sound lacked substance. To Young, the songs felt juvenile and unfinished, more like a garage band just learning its craft than seasoned musicians producing meaningful work. While the Ramones were celebrated for their speed and attitude, Young judged them by different criteria. He valued musical execution, tight arrangements, and the ability to engage audiences without relying solely on raw energy or shock value. Young's critique extended beyond the Ramones to the entire punk movement. He saw punk's emphasis on simplicity as a convenient substitute for real musicianship. In his own words, "They can do all that. It's pretty easy for a guy to go up there and do all that, but they can't play." For Young, this lack of technical skill undermined punk's claims to innovation. While punk celebrated rebellion and anti-establishment sentiment, Young believed it neglected the foundation of rock: the craft of playing instruments well, constructing memorable riffs, and creating music that could sustain emotional and sonic depth. To him, punk's appeal was superficial, a focus on attitude rather than artistry, speed rather than technique. This stance reflects a broader philosophy that has defined Young's career. AC/DC's music is rooted in high-energy precision, combining blistering guitar work with a consistent, disciplined approach to performance. Young prized musical excellence as much as raw excitement, and he measured other bands against that benchmark. Punk's rebellion and simplicity, while culturally significant, failed to impress him on a technical or artistic level. What do you think about the musicians that Angus Young hates? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.